The morning sun cast a golden glow over the ancient red brick buildings of Harvard University, the symbol of excellence, intelligence, and prestige. Students hurried across the cobblestone paths, carrying laptops and steaming cups of coffee, their laughter echoing through the crisp autumn air. Among them walked a quiet girl in worn-out sneakers, clutching a second-hand backpack against her chest. Her name was Emily Carter. Emily was unlike most students at Harvard. While others came from wealthy families and private schools, Emily came from a humble background. Her father, Mr. John Carter, worked as a janitor at the very same university. Every morning before dawn, he would clean the grand lecture halls and shiny marble floors, ensuring the place sparkled before the students arrived. Emily often accompanied him before her classes, helping him pick up papers and dust off desks. Never ashamed of his work, that morning she had her first class with Professor Richard Hayes, one of Harvard's most renowned teachers, brilliant, sharp-tongued, and famously arrogant. He believed that success and intellect belonged only to the elite. When Emily quietly took a seat in the back row, the other students whispered and giggled. Her clothes were simple, her old books were slightly torn, and her voice was soft. "Good morning, class," Professor Hayes said in his deep, commanding tone as he entered the room. He placed his leather briefcase on the desk and adjusted his glasses, scanning the students like a judge in a courtroom. "Before we begin, let's have introductions. Name, background, and why you think you deserve to be in this class." One by one, the students proudly introduced themselves, children of CEOs, lawyers, and politicians. They spoke of private tutors, international schools, and their family businesses. When it was Emily's turn, she stood slowly, feeling dozens of eyes on her. "My name is Emily Carter," she began softly. "I'm majoring in economics. I've always dreamed of studying here to learn how finance can help improve communities." Before she could finish, Professor Hayes interrupted with a smirk. "Carter, are you related to John Carter, the janitor?" A few students snickered. Emily hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, sir. He's my father." The professor let out a cold, dismissive laugh. "Well, isn't that something? A janitor's daughter at Harvard. How progressive." His tone dripped with sarcasm. The classroom burst into quiet chuckles. Emily stood frozen, her hands trembling slightly, but she refused to look away. Hayes continued, "I suppose you'll be teaching us how to clean up the economy, Miss Carter." The laughter grew louder. Emily forced a faint smile. "No, sir," she replied softly, her voice steadying. "But I hope to understand how to build one that doesn't look down on people like my father." The room fell silent. Even the students who laughed moments ago felt the weight of her words. The professor's smile faded slightly, but he quickly cleared his throat and turned to the board. "Let's move on," he said curtly, avoiding her eyes. Throughout the lecture, Emily sat quietly, her pen moving quickly across her notebook. She absorbed every word, every equation, determined to prove that she belonged there, not because of privilege, but because of passion and hard work. After class, she walked outside into the crisp air, holding back tears. Her father was sweeping the courtyard nearby. He looked up and smiled, his face lined with years of labor, but filled with warmth. "How was your first class, sweetheart?" he asked. Emily hesitated. "It was fine, Dad," she said softly, forcing a smile. "I learned something important today." Her father looked at her knowingly. "People can be cruel," he said gently, "but never let them make you forget who you are. Remember, floors only shine because someone works hard to clean them. Knowledge works the same way. You earn it through effort." Emily nodded, his words etching deep into her heart. That evening, as she sat by the window of their small apartment, she made herself a silent promise. She would study harder than anyone. She would rise beyond the laughter, the judgment, and the mockery. And one day, she would make them remember the name Emily Carter, not as the janitor's daughter, but as the girl who redefined brilliance. Outside, the lights of Harvard glowed in the night like stars. Emily looked out at the campus that once made her feel small and whispered, "Someday, I'll shine brighter than them all." That was the moment her journey began, the journey that would silence the arrogance of even Harvard's proudest minds. The days at Harvard turned into weeks, and the leaves outside turned from green to shades of gold and red. Autumn had arrived, and so had the whispers about the new student, the janitor's daughter who dared to sit among the elite. At first, Emily could feel the eyes on her whenever she entered the classroom. Some students ignored her completely, others whispered behind her back, but she never complained. Every day she arrived early, sat in the front row, and took meticulous notes. Her determination began to unsettle even those who once mocked her. Professor Hayes, meanwhile, continued his lectures with his usual arrogance. He noticed Emily's quiet focus, but refused to acknowledge it. Deep down, he wanted to see her fail. In his mind, Harvard was no place for ordinary people. One morning, as the class settled, Professor Hayes stood in front of the whiteboard and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, it's time to test who among you truly belongs here." He wrote in bold letters, "The Global Economic Sustainability Project." "This," he continued, "is your mid-semester challenge. Each of you must design a model that addresses economic inequality between nations. You will have 6 weeks. The best project will receive a scholarship and a personal recommendation from me to the Harvard Research Board." Gasps filled the room. That scholarship was life-changing. It meant free tuition and an internship with world-class economists. Every student wanted it, especially Emily, but Professor Hayes wasn't done. He smirked and added, "Of course, this isn't an easy task. It's not for everyone. Some of you may find it out of your reach." His eyes flicked briefly toward Emily before turning back to the class. Emily caught the glance. For a moment, doubt crept into her heart. Could she really compete against students with access to resources, mentors, and expensive data tools? But then she remembered her father's words, "Floors only shine because someone works hard to clean them." She took a deep breath and raised her hand. "Sir," she said calmly, "I'd like to take part in the challenge." The professor's smile was thin. "Of course, Miss Carter. I admire your confidence." The class giggled quietly. Emily ignored them and opened her notebook. Her eyes burned with quiet determination. That night, in their small apartment, Emily spread her books across the old wooden table. Her father came in, tired from a long shift, holding a simple dinner. "Still studying?" he asked gently. Emily nodded. "There's a project that could change everything for us, Dad. I want to win it." He placed a hand on her shoulder. "Then don't stop until you do. Remember, every great building stands on a strong foundation, and your foundation is hard work." Those words carried her through sleepless nights. While other students worked with expensive software and consultants, Emily relied on the university library and her own persistence. She spent hours reading economic case studies, watching lectures, and analyzing real-world data. Often, the janitors passing by would see her sitting under the dim lights of the library at midnight. Some would smile, whispering, "That's John's daughter. She's going to make us proud one day." Professor Hayes occasionally walked by, noticing her dedication. He never said a word, but something in his expression softened, perhaps curiosity, perhaps respect. Weeks passed, and Emily's model began to take shape. She called it the Equal Path Initiative, a plan that combined education, microfinance, and sustainable business models to help developing countries grow without dependency. It wasn't just numbers and charts. It was a vision built from her heart, from her experiences, from watching her father work endlessly to make life better. By the 5th week, most students were exhausted. Some gave up halfway, unable to complete the project. But Emily pressed on. She reviewed every formula, double-checked every statistic, and practiced her presentation in front of the mirror. The night before the submission, a storm swept through Cambridge. The power flickered and her laptop battery died, but Emily refused to stop. She continued writing by candlelight, finishing the final section of her report. True strength comes not from privilege, but from persistence. As dawn broke, she printed her report and placed it neatly in a folder. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from exhaustion and pride. She looked at her father, who was getting ready for his morning shift. "Ready?" he asked with a smile. Emily nodded. "Yes, no matter what happens today, I've already won something more valuable: self-belief." That morning, as she walked through the Harvard gates, her heart was steady. She knew the day of truth was coming soon. The challenge that was meant to break her spirit had instead built her strength, and in just a few days, Emily Carter, the janitor's daughter, would stand before the very professor who mocked her, ready to prove that brilliance has no social class. The day of the presentations arrived. The grand lecture hall at Harvard buzzed with nervous energy. Students were dressed formally, their laptops open, slides ready, voices rehearsing under their breath. On the front wall, a large banner read, "Global Economic Sustainability Presentation Day." Professor Richard Hayes sat behind his polished oak desk, his sharp eyes scanning the room like a hawk. The air was thick with tension. Emily Carter sat quietly in the corner, clutching her simple folder. Unlike others, she had no fancy laptop, no flashy graphics, just her handwritten notes and a mind sharper than any computer. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing on her shoulders. But she also felt something stronger, her father's faith and her own determination. "Let's begin," Professor Hayes announced, his voice echoing across the room. One by one, students presented their projects. There were graphs, projections, and complicated models filled with technical jargon. Each student spoke confidently, but none truly connected their ideas to the real world. They spoke from theory, not experience. After the fifth presentation, Hayes called out, "Miss Emily Carter, you're next." A few students exchanged glances. Some whispered, "This will be interesting." Others smirked. Emily stood, straightened her modest dress, and walked slowly to the podium. Her heart pounded, but her voice, when she spoke, was calm and clear. "Good morning, Professor Hayes. Good morning, everyone," she began. "My project is called the Equal Path Initiative. It's not just an economic model, it's a blueprint for hope." She placed her notes on the desk and began drawing on the whiteboard. Her hands moved gracefully, her mind sharp and organized. She explained how microfinance, education, and community-led business models could uplift developing nations. Unlike the others, she didn't use complicated terminology to impress. Instead, she told a story. "When I was a child," she said softly, "I watched my father work double shifts just to make sure I could go to school. We didn't have much, but he always said one thing: real success isn't what you earn, it's what you learn." That's why this project focuses on accessible education. Because knowledge is the true wealth that can change lives. The room grew silent. Even the students who once mocked her were now listening intently. Her words carried emotion, truth, and power. She moved from education to finance, showing how small loans and local training could empower poor communities to build businesses. Professor Hayes leaned forward slightly. His expression shifted from boredom to surprise. He couldn't believe how flawlessly she connected social issues with economic theory. Every graph she drew, every statistic she quoted, was accurate and meaningful. Then she ended her presentation with a line that echoed through the hall. "An economy should not measure success by how rich the top becomes, but by how strong the foundation grows. Because even the tallest building crumbles when the ground beneath is weak." For a moment, no one moved. The silence was deep, not out of boredom, but awe. Then slowly, applause began. It started from the back, then spread across the hall until everyone was standing. Emily looked around, her eyes wide with disbelief. The very same students who had laughed at her were now clapping for her brilliance. Professor Hayes sat frozen, his lips pressed together tightly as he tried to maintain composure. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Miss Carter," he said, his tone more respectful now, "where did you learn all this?" Emily looked at him calmly. "From my father," she said. "He may not be a professor, but he's the reason I understand the real value of work and knowledge." Her voice carried across the hall like a gentle wave. The professor blinked, his arrogance melting into silence. He glanced at his notes, then back at Emily. "Your project," he began slowly, "is remarkable. You've taken complex theory and turned it into something living, something human. That's rare." Emily smiled politely. "Thank you, sir." As she returned to her seat, the applause erupted again, louder this time, stronger, filled with admiration. For the first time, Emily felt not like an outsider, but as someone who truly belonged. After class, several students approached her, offering congratulations. "Emily, that was incredible," one said. "You made economics sound alive." Emily smiled. "That's because it is. It's about people, not just numbers." Outside, the afternoon sun shone brightly over the Harvard courtyard. Emily walked out, her father waiting near the gate, holding his broom. "How did it go?" he asked, wiping his hands nervously. Emily smiled, tears in her eyes. "I think I finally made them see me, Dad." Her father's eyes glistened with pride. "No, sweetheart," he said softly. "You made them see themselves." Inside the building, Professor Hayes stood by the window, watching her walk away. For the first time, he felt something he hadn't in years: humility. The janitor's daughter had just taught Harvard's proudest professor a lesson he would never forget. The following week, Harvard University's main auditorium was filled to the brim. It was the day of the annual Student Achievement Conference, an event where the best projects of the year were recognized before professors, scholars, and even the university board. The atmosphere buzzed with excitement and whispers. In the front row sat Professor Richard Hayes, his expression unreadable. On the stage, banners of Harvard's red and gold shimmered under the soft light. Among the finalists, one name stood out: Emily Carter, a first-year student, daughter of a janitor, and now the talk of the campus. Emily sat quietly backstage, clutching her note cards, her heart racing. She looked down at the small silver bracelet her father had given her the night before. It was engraved with a simple phrase, "Be proud of how far you've come." Moments later, her name was announced. "Please welcome Miss Emily Carter, presenting the Equal Path Initiative." As she stepped onto the stage, the hall fell silent. The spotlight hit her face, but this time she didn't feel small or nervous. She felt strong, like every moment of pain and humiliation had led her to this point. She began, her voice calm but filled with passion. "Ladies and gentlemen, education is the most powerful investment humanity can make. My project explores how equal access to education and microfinance can transform not just individuals, but entire economies." As she spoke, slides of her research appeared behind her, clear, insightful, powerful. Her data was flawless, but more than that, her heart shone through every word. She spoke of children who never got the chance to study, of workers who were invisible in society, and of her father, the janitor who taught her the dignity of labor. "My father may sweep the floors of Harvard," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "but his hands have built my dreams. And it's because of him that I'm standing here today." The audience sat in complete silence. Even the most senior professors listened intently, moved by her honesty. Her words carried a power that no textbook could teach. When she finished, there was a heartbeat of silence. Then the entire hall erupted into applause. Students stood clapping and cheering. Professors nodded in respect. Some even had tears in their eyes. Professor Hayes slowly rose from his seat. For a long moment, he simply looked at her, the girl he had once mocked, and then began clapping. It was slow at first, but then genuine. The crowd followed his lead until the hall thundered with admiration. Emily bowed her head humbly, tears welling in her eyes. She had done it. Later, as the winners were announced, the head of the university spoke into the microphone. "Harvard's Outstanding Achievement Award this year goes to Miss Emily Carter for her exceptional vision and her heart of gold." The audience cheered louder than ever. Cameras flashed. Emily stepped forward, her hands shaking as she accepted the golden plaque. In that moment, She looked out into the crowd and spotted her father standing near the back of the hall, wearing his janitor's uniform. His eyes were full of pride and tears. Emily smiled through her own tears and lifted the award toward him. The hall turned to see him, the man who once went unnoticed, and everyone began to clap for him too. The proud janitor wiped his eyes and whispered, "That's my girl." After the ceremony, Professor Hayes approached Emily backstage. He looked uncharacteristically nervous. "Miss Carter," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology. I judged you before I knew your worth. You've taught me that brilliance has nothing to do with background. It comes from the heart." Emily smiled kindly. "Thank you, sir. We all learn lessons in different ways." He nodded, humbled. "I'll never forget yours." That evening, Emily and her father walked together through the glowing Harvard courtyard. The air was cool, and the campus lights reflected off the marble walls. For the first time, people who once ignored them now smiled and greeted them with respect. Her father looked at her with pride. "You changed the way they see us, Emily." She shook her head softly. "No, Dad. I changed the way they see themselves." They stopped near the steps of the lecture hall where it had all begun, where the laughter once echoed. Now only silence filled the air. But it wasn't the silence of shame. It was the silence of awe, respect, and realization. Harvard would remember Emily Carter, not because of where she came from, but because of who she became. And somewhere inside that old building, Professor Hayes sat alone in his office, looking out the window, a faint smile on his face. For the first time, he felt grateful that a janitor's daughter had reminded Harvard of its truest lesson. Greatness isn't born in privilege, it's built in perseverance. The world outside sparkled in the night, and Emily's journey had just begun. No longer the janitor's daughter, but the voice that silenced arrogance with brilliance.